Hey there, I'm Shannon Ballard, creator and host of Southern Mysteries. This is an independent podcast made possible in part by the support of my patrons. I research, write, record, and produce every episode myself, and their support helps make stories like the one you're about to hear possible. Big thanks to all of my patrons, including folks who have recently joined me on Patreon. Dina Heckel of Anoka, Minnesota, Judy McNew of Hazelhurst, Mississippi, Trevor Ciprell of Arab, Alabama, and to Paulina, Linda Seresto, and Lisa. Thanks for supporting from a mysterious location. Now, if you want to join these very kind folks in helping me create Southern Mysteries, your support gives you access to the first 3 seasons of the show, which sound very different than Southern Mysteries sounds today, and it's only available on Patreon. Plus ad-free listening and exclusive stories through my monthly patron podcast, Audacious, where I share some of the most shocking and scandalous crimes in American history. Your support helps cover the real-world cost of creating this show, from research materials to website and hosting expenses and more, and I couldn't do it without you. You can join Southern Mysteries on Patreon and start listening to all of this content you haven't heard yet at patreon.com/Southern Mysteries, or if you already have the Patreon app, just search for Southern Mysteries Podcast. Now, on to our new episode. In the summer of 1924, a railroad worker was found dead near the tracks in Little Rock, Arkansas. Within weeks, another member of the same family was found dead in another state. Rumors quickly spread as both cases became headlines in national newspapers. At the heart of those headlines was a young woman who had married into the family and moved with them across state lines. Her name appeared in print again and again, beside words like mystery, slayer, and insane. Welcome to Southern Mysteries, exploring Southern history and true crime. I'm your host, Shannon Ballard. This is episode 181, The Crimes of Winona Spriggs. Before her name appeared in headlines across the country, Winona Spriggs was a young woman growing up in Arkansas and the Southwest. Winona Ola Spriggs was born in October 1900 in the small community of Blue Mountain near Danville, Arkansas. Her father was a carpenter who worked odd jobs. This often meant uprooting the family so he could work in another state. In 1907, Winona and her 2 siblings were loaded into a wagon with their parents. As they traveled towards her father's new job in New Mexico, her mother became ill and died suddenly. Winona's father was distraught and struggled to make ends meet as he cared for his children. By 1910, the family was living with Winona's grandfather in New Mexico. The details of Winona's life from this point until she was accused of murder in 1924 are hazy. She was said to have worked many jobs in her teen years, and eventually records show she worked in a contractor's office in Bixby, Oklahoma. There's evidence she married a newspaper man from Tulsa, Mr. Moore, but no documentation has ever been able to back up that claim. Winona was known as a friendly young woman who knew most folks by name in Bixby. She and the man folks knew as her husband were said to have struggled with narcotics and were once accused of stealing a car for a drive to Utah. They were arrested, returned to Oklahoma, but never prosecuted for a crime. Winona was known as the kind of woman who liked risk and adventure. What would later make Winona a subject of national attention was who she married in the early 1920s and the family that became tied to her name. At some point in her early adulthood, Winona's life intersected with the Green family of Little Rock, Arkansas. She met and married Leroy Green in Oklahoma. Leroy was one of the sons of railroad worker J.R. Green and his wife Lena. J.R. was a switchman whose days and nights were set by train schedules and yard work. The job offered steady pay, but was demanding and dangerous. Work around railroad tracks required constant attention and often pulled a man away from home at unpredictable hours. Once Winona married into the family, she stepped into the traditional world of a 1920s housewife. For a while, she moved in with her in-laws and helped support the family. There were hints of a strained relationship within the Green household, with disagreements over money. Whatever strain existed inside the Green household was not unusual for the time. Families argued over money. Young marriages experienced tension. None of it seemed enough to predict what would come next. Workdays passed, meals were shared. Plans were made with the assumption that everyone would return home. But J.R. Green would not return home on the evening of Saturday, August 16th. That afternoon, Green left his home in Little Rock and went to work. By the next morning, his body was found along the Rock Island Railroad tracks, just west of the city. As a switchman, he was responsible for guiding trains safely through track crossings and yard routes. That kind of work was dangerous, but this wasn't a misstep or mechanical failure. J.R. Green had been murdered, shot in the chest. His wound, the location of his body, and the lack of signs of a struggle made one thing clear to investigators. Someone J.R. Green likely knew led him out to the spot where he was shot and killed. Investigators noted that Green still had personal belongings on him. What little money he carried hadn't been taken. His watch was still on his wrist. This wasn't a robbery. It was something more personal. At the time of his death, Green was in his early 50s. He was well known around the yards and considered dependable by coworkers. His family said he had left home that evening as usual, without complaints or concern. Whatever he planned to do that night, he hadn't expected it to be different from any other. Initial reports in the Little Rock press were brief, but uneasy. A man dead by the tracks, a gun involved, no witnesses or motive. The Green family was shaken. J.R.'s wife Lena and their children were notified almost immediately of his death. Their son Leroy and his wife Winona were notified while living in Pueblo, Colorado. Leroy had taken a job in Colorado, possibly to create some much-needed space between his parents and his wife. The family made arrangements to bury J.R. in Little Rock. His funeral, held days after his death, was quiet. There were rumors, as there always are, that J.R. Green may have been followed, that he had been called away that night by someone he trusted, maybe stumbled into something he shouldn't have. But nothing solid surfaced. Weeks later, another body was found, this time in another state, and the mystery surrounding J.R. Green's death would take a darker, stranger turn. Weeks after the death of J.R., the body of his wife, Lena, was found in Oklahoma. Lena had left Arkansas with her daughter-in-law, Winona, 2 weeks after her husband died. Lena made the decision to travel west to visit her son, Leroy, in Colorado. Some of Lena's friends later said she planned to beg Leroy to return to Arkansas with his wife. But the details of what happened during Lena's trip were not known. We know Lena traveled part of the way with Winona. Newspaper accounts placed the two women in Oklahoma, possibly en route to Red Fork, a small town just outside Tulsa. Some sources claimed Winona and Lena were visiting friends near that town. Lena Green vanished in early September 1924. Friends in Arkansas knew only that she had gone west. Days passed without word as to where Lena could be. Eventually, authorities in Oklahoma were contacted. A search began near a Red Fork, and soon, Lena's body was found in a wooded area outside town. The condition of the remains made identification difficult at first, but personal effects confirmed it was Lena Green. She had been shot in a remote location, far from main roads. There were no signs of robbery, no witnesses, and no motive. But there was a suspect. With 2 deaths now tied to the same family, investigators turned their attention to the only person who had been close to both victims in their final days, Winona Spriggs Green. Investigators traveled to Colorado to meet with Leroy and Winona Green. Both were taken into custody in early October 1924 and returned to Little Rock for questioning. With no evidence tying Leroy to the death of his parents, he was released shortly after he was taken into custody. Winona was held and interrogated several times over the next few days. Newspapers began reporting she had confessed. If a confession existed, it was never written down and entered into police or any public records. Despite this, news surrounding the murders and Winona's reported confession appeared in newspapers from Arkansas to the East Coast. According to law enforcement accounts, Winona told investigators she had planned the killings. She claimed that months earlier, at Christmas 1923, she had loaned Lena Green about $4,000. She said the loan was meant to be temporary. When she later asked for repayment, she claimed her mother-in-law delayed, made excuses, and refused to return the money. Winona told authorities that resentment grew over time. In her reported statements, she admitted to killing J.R. Green first, luring him out near the railroad tracks outside Little Rock on the night of August 16th, and shooting him. Weeks later, she said she traveled with Lena to Oklahoma, led her into a wooded area, and killed her. Authorities said Winona described both acts as deliberate. She reportedly told investigators she had thought through what she was doing and expected to be punished for it. She forged financial transactions between herself and J.R. Green to get the money back that she was owed. Police summed up Winona's confession, saying with 3 simple words, she gave the reason for the murders. They owed me. That level of detail painted a picture of a young woman who was not acting in panic or confusion, but with intention. Whether Winona ever said those words remains unclear. What is clear is that they shaped how the public understood the case and left little room for doubt. Winona was reportedly calm during her time in custody, and that calm demeanor, while facing a capital murder charge, led the press to question her mental state, suggesting an insanity defense might be considered. By late October, a Pulaski County grand jury indicted Winona Spriggs Green for the murder of J.R. Green. In January 1925, Winona stood trial for the murder of her father-in-law. The trial moved quickly. By the standards of the time, the case against her was straightforward. Authorities relied heavily on her reported confession, the absence of any alternate suspect, and the connection between the 2 deaths. The jury returned a guilty verdict, and 24-year-old Winona Spriggs Green was sentenced to life in prison. There was no separate trial held in Oklahoma for the murder of Lena Green. Arkansas and Oklahoma authorities treated the life sentence as sufficient punishment for both killings. But Winona's story didn't end with a murder conviction. Winona's confinement did not calm her restless soul. In April of 1925, she escaped from the county jail. She was captured days later in Memphis, Tennessee, and returned to custody in Arkansas. But that escape marked the beginning of a pattern. In June 1926, Winona escaped again, this time from the Arkansas State Farm near Tucker. Each time she was recaptured, authorities tightened restrictions, and each time she found another way out. Officials would describe her as a problem inmate, someone who did not submit easily to routine or confinement. Despite her troubled and complicated record behind bars, in June of 1931, Arkansas authorities granted her a temporary furlough to enter a sanatorium in California. Soon after arriving, Winona was arrested on charges of check forgery. She was returned to the Arkansas Penitentiary, marking the first of several times her parole or furlough would be revoked after new criminal charges. In December of 1932, while again on furlough, Winona married Herbert Jones in Arkansas. A few years later, in November 1935, she was again arrested for check forgery. Financial crimes would follow her for the rest of her life, surfacing repeatedly whenever she was released under supervision. This, along with her occasional confinement, led to the eventual breakdown of her marriage. Winona Spriggs never focused on reform. She only focused on the future and finding her next husband. By September of 1942, she married James Freeman. And in 1946, she was once again connected to violence. On August 27th of that year, 33-year-old Robert Wilkinson was found dead near Grand Lake, just outside Miami, Oklahoma. Authorities suspected Winona's involvement after Wilkinson's body was found under suspicious circumstances. Her presence in the area and a criminal history made her a suspect, but investigators acknowledged all they had was a theory and circumstantial evidence. No charges were filed for Wilkinson's death. But the allegation would resurface in another murder case years later. By the early 1950s, Winona was living in California with her husband James, having either been paroled again or given another furlough. In December of 1953, newspapers in Salinas, California, ran a missing person report about 78-year-old Harold Jonasson. The wealthy, retired rancher had been missing since November 23rd. Law enforcement had learned Harold Jonasson crossed paths with a woman known as Winnie Freeman in 1952 when she was managing an apartment home where he lived. Mr. Jonasson had immigrated from Denmark, was not married, and had no family in America. He was in his late 70s, alone, and wealthy. Winnie Freeman offered to drive him around town for errands and appointments. She was reportedly the last person seen with Harold Jonasson in November. When investigators working the missing person case made inquiries about Winnie Freeman, they learned she was really Winona Spriggs Green Freeman, a convicted murderer with a history of financial crimes. They questioned Winona and told her the only way to clear her name was to take a lie detector test, which she failed. She was interrogated by investigators who told her they knew Mr. Jonasson was dead. They begged her to do the right thing and lead them to his body so he could have a proper burial. It took a few hours, but 53-year-old Winona Freeman confessed to the murder of Harold Jonasson. She led authorities to his body, which she had dumped in a field about 15 miles away from Salinas. Jonasson had been shot. Winona was arrested and charged with his murder. Newspapers covered every detail of the disappearance and the trial that followed. Winona was described repeatedly as the Cat Lady, a nickname drawn from living with more than 24 cats in a shack she shared with her husband. During the trial in March of 1954, she testified in her own defense. Winona told the jury that Jonasson had been shot accidentally while they were rabbit hunting with a .22 rifle. She said she hid his body not because she intended to kill him, but because she was terrified of being returned to prison for violating parole. Prosecutors rejected that explanation. They argued the killing was deliberate and premeditated. They presented evidence Winona had forged checks totaling hundreds of dollars in Jonason's name, and that she intended to take as much money as she could from him. The jury rejected Winona's claim that the shooting was accidental. She was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment for the second time. She was already on parole from a life sentence imposed nearly 3 decades earlier. In effect, the court in California imposed life on top of life. Winona Freeman died on October 30th, 1974, at the age of 74. Her obituary was published in the San Bernardino Sun, and 1 day later, an article was published in the same paper titled Death, Her Final Freedom. Winnie Spriggs, as she was known at the time, had been granted parole 2 years before her death and was living in a nursing home. She was known by her neighbors and friends as a gentle old woman with a lively twinkle in her eyes and a quick wit, a good companion who was also the savior of countless stray cats. Many knew that when Winona died, she was living on parole, that she had spent 48 of the past 50 years in prisons, jails, or running from the law. She was a convicted murderer. Winona Spriggs died of natural causes after a long life. Her final years were marked by acceptance, even affection from people who knew her only as the woman she had become. But at least 3 people who crossed paths with Winona Spriggs were never given the chance to live out their lives naturally. Winona Spriggs' legacy was not the gentle old cat lady. As one Arkansas investigator described her decades earlier, she was a cold and calculated criminal, a woman capable of patiently and methodically planning violence. She lived a long life, but the people she killed were not afforded the same mercy. Southern Mysteries is created and hosted by me, Shannon Ballard. You can find sources for this episode in the show notes where you're listening or at southernmysteries.com. If you enjoyed this story, be sure you're following Southern Mysteries where you're listening. And if you have a moment, leave a rating or review. It really helps other history and true crime fans discover the show. You can also help spread the word by sharing this episode with a friend who loves a good mystery. Word of mouth makes a big difference for independent shows like this one. Now, Southern Mysteries is on winter break and will return with new episodes on Monday, January 12th. Thank you so much for listening this year. I hope you enjoy the holiday season, and I look forward to sharing more Southern Mysteries with you in the new year.